Great to see you, Mr. Secretary. Did you know that you were going to be in charge of space? You're going to be the space czar? Or did you say, sure, give it to me? That doesn't seem like that, doesn't encompass that much.
I don't think czar is the right term. The effort is that we're going to try to deregulate space and update to the present the old regulations. A lot of space regulations are 25 years old, and the whole world has changed a lot in 25 years, but particularly satellite communications, satellite imagery, the whole thing, missile propulsion systems, all have changed. And so it's time to create a more permissive regulatory environment so that the U.S. is the country of choice for space.
I wondered about that, Wilbur, because you see how many, Branson and Elon Musk and all these things are happening, and nothing's changed in terms of oversight and federal regulations, and the whole, that whole part of the progress is happening without, and that's the way it should work. There's basic science, obviously, that the government does, but after that, let the private sector take over, and the government's got to be a partner, not an impediment, and that's what you're trying to do.
Well, that's exactly right. We think the pace of regulatory change has got to match the pace of technological change. Technology is booming. You saw this incredible SpaceX launch, which I was privileged to be at, and it was really quite an amazing thing. And at the end of it, you have that little red Tesla hurtling off to an orbit around the sun and the moon. Well, there need to be rules of the road, but there shouldn't be a lot of U-turns, there shouldn't be a lot of one-way streets, and there surely shouldn't be a lot of dead ends. So that's what we're going to try to fix with the deregulation of space and creating permissive regulations so that we can encourage space development here.
And just to spark the imagination, then we'll get back to the here and now, Wilbur, but when you talk to experts, and I'm talking about asteroid mining. Just yesterday or day before, we had a story about cobalt and how expensive it's going to be because of lithium batteries, that Apple's going to mine its own cobalt. I mean, the idea of what's out there on an asteroid, it's supposedly you could have mineral wealth that eclipses the entire world economy if you did that. What is the actual time frame for when that would actually be feasible? Will it be 5 years, 10 years, 50 years? Do you know?
Well, I think a lot depends upon how successful we are in turning the moon into a kind of gas station for outer space. The dark surfaces that you see when you look up at the moon are actually hundreds of feet of solid ice. So the plan is to break the ice down into hydrogen and oxygen, use those as the fuel propellant. So what it would mean is that liftoff against the gravity of Earth would not need to be nearly the 5,100,000 pounds of thrust that SpaceX had to have, because you would now only have to get to the moon. And then at the moon, you have very low gravity, so you don't need so much thrust to go from the moon to Mars, for example, or to another asteroid. So the technological breakthrough really is going to be in a number of areas, one of which would be using the moon as a gas station.
Secretary Ross, I understand what you're trying to do to make sure that private industry can really make a lot of these advances. It's been amazing what we've seen in the last few years from private industry. But if we're not there kind of carving out the rules of the road and how it gets done, do we worry that we're no longer kind of setting the rules for other nations, too, that Chinese companies or somebody else can just go over and it's going to be the Wild West up there?
Oh, there will be rules of the road. There need to be. There need to be means for policing, if you will, the debris in space.
Right.
That's one of the big problems, and as more and more launches occur, more and more old satellites reach the end of their life, that's going to be a problem that we have to deal with.
Well, we've had astronauts tell us that's their biggest fear when they're in space.
Well, sure, because when things are going at a very great speed, even a very small object can create a great deal of damage.
Yeah. Well, I know that you've submitted some recommendations to the president on steel and aluminum and such, and I mean, you've already spoken out on that issue. Can you give us any insight as when we're going to hear, or what the likely outcome is, and whether there's any, I don't know, any repercussions or any recriminations about whether it's a right move, given that things seem to be going pretty well globally right now, and I don't know whether we necessarily want to mess with the trade picture.
Well, things are going pretty well globally. They're especially going well in the U.S. because of the president's policies excuse me, on regulatory reform and on tax. But on the narrower issue of trade, you notice the equity markets have been fine since the details of the 232 investigations were released to the public last week. So there surely hasn't been any great distress in the financial markets resulting from them. The decision will be the president's, and he has until April 11th for one and April 19th for another. I have no idea when between now and then he will make his decision, but I'm sure he will do it in a very thoughtful and very systematic way.
I'm trying to figure this. I don't know. Is this going anywhere? The EU looking into our tax reform legislation to see if it breaches the WTO. Do you think that goes anywhere at all? I mean, I could be cynical about the whole idea of it. Well, we get our tax rate down near where they are, and they're carping about that. I don't get it.
I think it's a little weird for the EU to be trying to determine what United States tax policy should be. But I think what is significant is they know it's going to have an impact. They know it's going to have an impact on building more foreign direct investment in the U.S. They know it's going to have an impact on building domestic investment in the U.S., and they don't like that because they've had it too easy for too long when we had an unrealistically high tax rate. Now we're getting into a proper zone. It will be good for our economy. I don't think that necessarily has to be bad for theirs, but for sure, it's a big help for ours.
What's their grounds? I don't even understand the grounds on how they take that to the WTO. What's the thesis behind it?
Oh, I think it gets into some potentially very technical issues, but I think the real thing behind it is the U.S. is the least protectionist major country. The EU, if you think of it as one country, because for trade purposes it really is one of the more protectionist countries. So anything that changes their favorable trade balance with us gives them a...
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.